No. No, please, don't go.
All right, just one step. Have the time of your life.
Thank you, Dad. Bye.
Bye, honey.
How could you do this? You're too sick to go, Mom.
We're worried about you.
Just rest. We'll unpack later. No. Oh, God, no. He left me.
The moment I saw my son smiling as he helped my granddaughter board the Alaska cruise I'd spent 3 years saving for, my heart stopped. 48 hours earlier, they had tearfully convinced me I was too sick to travel. They said my doctor agreed. They promised we'd take the trip together next year. But there they were, holding my boarding pass, sleeping in the suite I had paid for, acting as though I had never existed. In that instant, I realized the greatest danger to my health wasn't my age. It was the family I trusted most. If my story touches your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe so we can continue sharing these journeys together. And I'd truly love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were standing where I stood that morning? Please leave a comment with your thoughts and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Reading your messages always reminds me that none of us walks through life's hardest moments alone. If someone had asked me 10 years ago what I wanted most in life, I would have said exactly what every mother says. I just want my family to be happy. Back then, I truly believed that if the people I loved were smiling, I didn't need anything for myself. Looking back now, I realize something painful. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being Gloria Jenkins. I became mom, then grandma, then the person everyone called whenever they needed something. I never complained because helping my family made me feel useful. After my husband Robert passed away from a heart attack 16 years earlier, taking care of everyone else became my purpose. We had been married for 41 wonderful years. He used to joke that I couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. If you ever retire, he'd laugh, you'll probably volunteer somewhere by the second day. He knew me too well. After retiring from teaching 3rd grade at an elementary school in Savannah, Georgia, I started tutoring children at the local library twice a week. I volunteered at church on Saturdays. I baked pies for neighborhood fundraisers. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. Financially, Robert and I had always been careful. Neither of us came from wealthy families. Everything we owned had been earned one paycheck at a time. Our little brick house had taken nearly 30 years to pay off. Every vacation required months of planning. Every new car came after years of saving. Robert believed debt stole peace from a family, so we lived simply. When he died, he left me more than memories. He left me security, not luxury, just enough that I would never have to depend on anyone. Ironically, that's exactly what my children thought they were protecting. Or at least that's what they claimed later. I have 2 children. My oldest is Michael. He's 43 and works as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. He's charming, confident, the kind of man who can make strangers laugh within 5 minutes. Growing up, everyone adored him. Teachers, neighbors, coaches. Even after becoming an adult, Michael had a way of making every conversation sound reasonable. That was one of his greatest gifts, and eventually one of his greatest weapons. My younger child is my daughter Karen. She's 40. She works as a dental hygienist and has always been more reserved than her brother. As children, they couldn't have been more different. Michael talked his way into everything. Karen quietly observed everyone around her. If Michael wanted something, he'd ask. If Karen wanted something, she'd wait until someone offered. I used to think that made her selfless. Now I wonder if she simply learned a quieter way to get what she wanted. Michael married Jennifer nearly 15 years ago. They have 2 children. Emma is 16. Lucas just turned 12. Karen divorced several years ago and doesn't have children of her own. Despite living only 40 minutes away, she visited less often than Michael's family. Still, every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas we were together. Or so I believed. People often asked if I was lonely living alone. The truth, not really. Between church volunteering, book club, and my grandchildren's soccer games and school concerts, my calendar stayed surprisingly full. But every Sunday evening, after everyone left my house, silence settled into every room. That's when I missed Robert most. I'd still catch myself reaching for a second coffee mug some mornings. I'd still hear an old country song in the grocery store and instinctively smile because it had been our song. Grief changes over time. It doesn't disappear. It simply becomes quieter. 3 years before the cruise, I made a promise to myself. Actually, I made it to Robert. I was sitting on the porch one evening watching the sunset. His old fishing hat still hung on the hook beside the back door. I remember looking at it and saying out loud, "You always wanted to see Alaska." We'd talked about it for years. Snow-covered mountains, whales, glaciers, northern lights. But life kept getting in the way. First, we were paying for college. Then Michael lost his first job during the recession. Then Karen needed help after her divorce. Then Robert's heart problems began. There was always another reason to wait. We kept saying next year, until one day there weren't any more next years. That evening on the porch, I decided I wouldn't make the same mistake. I opened a brand new savings account. Every month I transferred a little money into it, sometimes $50, sometimes $100. Whenever I tutored extra students, I added that money too. I skipped buying new furniture, delayed replacing perfectly good appliances, cooked at home instead of eating out, not because I had to, because I had a dream. It wasn't just about seeing Alaska, it was about proving something to myself. That life didn't end after 65, that widows were still allowed to dream, that I wasn't simply waiting for time to run out. When I finally booked the cruise, I cried. Not because it was expensive, because I'd actually done it. The travel agent smiled kindly as she handed me the confirmation packet. "You've earned this," she said. I believed her. When I told my family during Thanksgiving dinner, everyone applauded. Michael even stood up and hugged me. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Jennifer smiled. "You deserve something wonderful." Karen squeezed my hand. "Dad would have loved this." Emma immediately asked if I would take hundreds of pictures. Lucas wanted to know whether I'd see polar bears. It felt perfect. Then Michael made another suggestion. "You know what?" "What?" I asked. "You shouldn't experience something this special alone." Everyone nodded. Jennifer laughed. "We could make it a family vacation." At first, I shook my head. "I've already booked a cabin." Michael leaned forward. "You can upgrade." Karen smiled. "It would be unforgettable." Looking back, I should have noticed something. Nobody asked whether I wanted company. They assumed they should be included. At the time, I interpreted it as love, as excitement, as family wanting to create memories together. I never imagined that inviting them into my dream would eventually cost me far more than money. Because I wasn't just giving them a vacation. Without realizing it, I was handing them the keys to the very dream I'd spent 3 years building. The week before our cruise should have been one of the happiest weeks of my life. Instead, it became the week my family quietly convinced me to stop trusting my own judgment. It started on a Tuesday morning. I had spent most of the day working in my backyard, trimming rose bushes that Robert had planted years earlier. Georgia summers are beautiful, but they can also be brutally humid. By the time I finished, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and I realized I hadn't stopped for water in nearly 4 hours. As I carried my gardening tools toward the garage, the world suddenly tilted. It lasted no more than 5 seconds. I reached for the fence, closed my eyes, and took a slow breath. When the dizziness passed, I blamed the heat. I walked inside, drank 2 large glasses of water, sat beneath the ceiling fan, and within 20 minutes, I felt completely normal again. I honestly forgot about it. Unfortunately, someone else didn't. That evening, Michael stopped by unexpectedly. He rarely visited on weekdays. "Mom," he said as he walked through the kitchen carrying a grocery bag, "Karen told me you almost collapsed today." I frowned. "I didn't collapse." "You got dizzy. For a few seconds." "You should have called me." "I drank some water and I was fine." Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied my face with a seriousness that felt almost uncomfortable. "When was your last physical?" "About 3 months ago." "You should probably go again." I laughed. "Michael, I'm 67, not 97. "I know. I'm healthy." "I know." but humor me. There was something unusual about the conversation, not what he said, how he said it. I wasn't asking. He was gently steering me toward a conclusion. At the time, I mistook it for concern. The following morning, Karen called before I had finished breakfast. Michael told me what happened. I sighed. Apparently, the whole family knows. We're worried. I appreciate that. No, Mom. We're really worried. Again, the same tone. Calm, measured, almost rehearsed. She insisted on driving me to my doctor's office that afternoon. My car works perfectly well, I reminded her. I know. I've driven myself to appointments for 50 years. I just feel better if I came. Eventually, I agreed, mostly because arguing seemed more exhausting than accepting the ride. Dr. Samuel Harris had been my physician for nearly 15 years. He knew my medical history almost as well as I did. After checking my blood pressure, listening to my heart, and reviewing my recent blood work, he smiled. You've been gardening in 95-degree weather again, haven't you? I smiled sheepishly. I may have overdone it. He nodded. I think you became dehydrated. So nothing serious. I don't see anything alarming. He recommended drinking more water, avoiding the hottest part of the afternoon, and standing up more slowly after bending over. Then he looked directly at me. You're doing remarkably well for someone your age. I laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. We spent another 10 minutes discussing my upcoming Alaska cruise. He even joked that I should send him photographs if I saw whales. When the appointment ended, I walked toward the reception desk to schedule my next annual checkup. Karen intercepted me. I'll handle it. You don't have to. I already have the calendar open. While she spoke with the receptionist, I wandered toward a display about flu vaccines. Looking back, I realized something important. Karen remained at this front desk much longer than necessary, nearly 10 minutes. At the time, I assumed paperwork was taking longer than usual. Now, I wish I had asked more questions. As we drove home, Karen seemed unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. Mom. Yes. What if you postpone the cruise? I turned toward her. What? Just until next year. Why would I do that? You got dizzy. I got dehydrated. Still, I smiled reassuringly. The doctor isn't worried. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. He said you should be careful. Yes. He said long trips can be exhausting. I don't remember him saying that. He implied it. No, I frowned. I don't think he did. Karen quickly changed the subject. I let it go. That evening, Jennifer called. Then my sister Denise. Then even Emma texted me. Grandma, Mom says you're not feeling well. I hope you're okay. I stared at the message for several seconds. How had everyone heard about this? It had been a simple case of dehydration, nothing more. Yet somehow it had already become a family emergency. The next day, Michael came over carrying dinner. You don't need to cook. I wasn't planning to. I'll make sure you eat. I laughed. I've managed to feed myself since 1959. He smiled politely, but he didn't laugh. Instead, he began asking strange questions. Where are your cruise documents? In the blue folder. Do you have travel insurance? Yes. Where's your passport? In the same folder. You should let me hold on to everything. Why? So if anything happens, I can help. I hesitated. That tiny pause should have warned me. Instead, I reminded myself that he was my son. What possible reason would I have not to trust him? I walked into my bedroom closet and retrieved the navy blue folder. Inside were months of careful planning, reservation confirmations, cruise itineraries, excursion tickets, insurance documents, my passport, luggage tags, everything. Michael looked through the folder with surprising attention. I'll organize these better. They're already organized. I just want to make copies. Copies. In case something gets lost. It sounded reasonable. Everything he said sounded reasonable. That's what made it so dangerous. He slipped the folder into his leather briefcase. I'll bring it back tomorrow. I watched him walk toward the front door. Something deep inside me whispered that I should ask for it back. Instead, I smiled. Don't forget. I won't. He kissed my forehead. I love you, Mom. I love you too. After he left, I noticed something strange. The house felt empty, not physically, emotionally, as though something important had just walked out the door. The following afternoon, Michael returned the folder exactly as promised. Everything appeared to be inside. I thanked him for helping. He hugged me a little longer than usual. You know we're only trying to protect you. I know. We'd never let anything happen to you. Those words stayed with me. Because 2 days later, they would use that same promise to convince me that I was too sick to live the dream I had spent 3 years building. And at the time, I still had no idea that the conversation about my health had already spread far beyond my family. Someone was quietly building a story about me, a story in which I was fragile, confused, and no longer capable of making my own decisions. The morning our cruise was scheduled to depart began with rain. Not a heavy storm, just a soft gray drizzle that made everything outside my bedroom window look blurry. I had barely slept. The night before, my family had gathered in my living room for what they called an important conversation. Looking back, it felt less like a discussion and more like an intervention. Michael had arrived first. Karen came a few minutes later. Jennifer brought homemade soup. Even Emma and Lucas were unusually quiet. I remember joking as I answered the door. What is this? Have I accidentally planned my own birthday party? No one laughed. Michael exchanged a glance with Karen before speaking. Mom, we've all been talking. My stomach tightened. About what? About your health. I looked from one face to another. My health. Karen reached over and gently held my hand. We're worried about you. I appreciate that, but... Michael interrupted softly. Please, just hear us out. Something about those words made me nervous. Jennifer leaned forward. You've had several dizzy spells. No, I had one, Karen corrected me, and you were exhausted afterward. I was tired because I spent all afternoon gardening. Michael nodded sympathetically. Exactly. I frowned. What does gardening have to do with Alaska? No one answered immediately. Instead, Michael took a folded sheet of paper from his briefcase. I called Dr. Harris's office. That surprised me. You what? I wanted to understand the risks. I stared at him. You discussed my health. We're family. I never gave permission. His expression remained calm. I'm only trying to protect you. Then he unfolded the paper. The nurse said long flights and physically demanding travel aren't recommended after episodes like yours. I reached for the paper. Before I could read it, he folded it again. It isn't important. If it isn't important, let me see it. It's medical. I blinked. My medical information. Jennifer quickly stepped in. Gloria, please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder, I felt as though everyone else knew something I didn't. Karen squeezed my hand tighter. Mom, the cruise will still be there next year. I slowly pulled my hand away. I've already paid for everything. We know. I've waited 3 years. We know. I'm healthy. Silence. Then Michael said the sentence that changed everything. Sometimes healthy people make unsafe decisions. The room became so quiet I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. I looked at Emma. She avoided my eyes. Lucas stared at the floor. Jennifer folded her hands together as if she were sitting in church. No one looked angry. They looked prepared, as though they had practiced this conversation before arriving. I suddenly felt like the only person who hadn't read the script. Michael spoke gently. We talked about it. We, the whole family. And, we don't think you should go. Those words landed harder than I expected. Not because they questioned my health, because they questioned my judgment. For 67 years, I had made my own decisions. I had raised children, managed a household, cared for my dying husband, balanced finances, bought and sold homes, planned every detail of this vacation. Yet suddenly, everyone in the room seemed convinced I couldn't decide whether I was healthy enough to board a cruise ship. I stood slowly. I appreciate everyone's concern. Relief briefly appeared on Michael's face. But I'm still going. The relief disappeared instantly. Karen looked close to tears. Mom, please don't make us watch something terrible happen. What terrible thing? What if you collapse on the ship? I won't. You don't know that. Neither do you. Michael stood as well. You aren't listening. No, I answered quietly. I don't think you're listening. He rubbed both hands across his face. Mom, I've spent my entire life taking care of everyone else. I know. When was the last time I chose something just for myself? No one answered. I've earned this trip, Jennifer finally spoke. No one's saying you haven't. It sounds exactly like that's what you're saying. Michael took a deep breath. What if we postpone it? I don't want to postpone it. What if we all go next summer? I want to go this week. Karen's voice cracked. We're scared. I looked directly into her eyes. So am I. Everyone seemed confused. I'm scared, I repeated, because life keeps teaching me that waiting is dangerous. I glanced toward the framed photograph of Robert on the fireplace. We waited to take this cruise. My voice became quieter. We waited until retirement. We waited until work slowed down. We waited until money was better. We waited until your father felt stronger. I swallowed hard. Then one morning he didn't wake up. No one spoke. I promised myself I wouldn't spend the rest of my life waiting. Tears rolled down Karen's cheek. Michael walked toward me. He placed both hands on my shoulders. I understand. No, I whispered. I don't think you do. He looked genuinely heartbroken, or at least I believed he did. If something happened to you out there, he said softly, I'd never forgive myself. Those words reached the part of me that had always been a mother before anything else. Every instinct inside me wanted to reassure my son, to protect him from fear, to make his pain disappear. I had spent 43 years doing exactly that. Even now, he knew exactly which part of my heart to reach. Jennifer quietly added, think about your grandchildren. Emma finally looked up. We want you around for a long time, Grandma. Lucas nodded. We love you. I felt trapped. If I insisted on going, I became the selfish one, the reckless one, the grandmother willing to risk everyone's peace of mind. If I stayed, everyone else would feel relieved. The decision suddenly seemed less about my health than about everyone's emotions. Michael reached into his pocket. Already contacted the cruise line. I stared at him. You did what? I explained the situation. Without asking me. They understand. You called them. They said we can work everything out. Every sentence made me feel smaller, as though decisions about my own life were quietly being made somewhere else. Karen hugged me. Please. Jennifer hugged me too. Then Emma. Then Lucas. One after another. Until I stood surrounded by people telling me how much they loved me, while asking me to give up the one dream I had spent years chasing. Finally, I nodded. All right. Michael let out a long breath. Thank you. Karen cried with relief. Jennifer smiled. We knew you'd make the right decision. The right decision. Those words echoed in my mind long after everyone left. That night, I unpacked my suitcase. I carefully folded every sweater, every scarf, every pair of gloves I'd bought specifically for Alaska. I removed the whale-watching binoculars Robert had once given me for Christmas. I placed them back inside the closet. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and cried harder than I had cried in years. Not because I believed I was dying, because for the first time in my life, I felt as though my own family no longer believed I was capable of living. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. The house felt unbearably quiet. I made coffee out of habit, but I couldn't drink it. Something inside me wouldn't let go. I kept thinking about my luggage, about my boarding pass, about the thousands of dollars I'd spent. Finally, I picked up my purse. I wasn't planning to board the ship. I simply wanted to speak to someone at the cruise terminal in person. Maybe I could arrange a future credit. Maybe I could recover some of the money. I told myself it would bring me closure. I had no idea that less than an hour later, standing inside that busy terminal. I would look through a rain-speckled window and see every member of my family laughing together as they boarded my cruise, with my luggage, my reservation, and the dream they had convinced me to abandon. For several long seconds, I couldn't breathe. I stood just inside the entrance of the Savannah Cruise Terminal, rainwater dripping from the umbrella in my hand, while hundreds of excited passengers streamed around me. Children laughed as they pointed toward the enormous white ship docked outside. Newlyweds posed for photographs beneath a banner welcoming guests aboard. Elderly couples held hands as they pulled matching suitcases behind them. Everyone seemed to be beginning a wonderful adventure. Everyone except me. Because 20 yards away, standing in the priority boarding line, was my entire family. Michael was wearing a navy windbreaker I had given him for Christmas 2 years earlier. Jennifer had a camera hanging around her neck, smiling as she adjusted Emma's scarf. Lucas bounced impatiently beside two large suitcases, my suitcases. I recognized the bright blue ribbon I had tied around the handles so they would be easy to spot at baggage claim. Karen stood beside them wearing a brand new fleece jacket embroidered with the cruise line's logo. I had never seen that jacket before. Neither had I ever seen the matching sweatshirts everyone else wore. Across the front, stitched in silver thread, were three simple words: Family Adventure 2026. My chest tightened. They had planned matching outfits. They had prepared for photographs. They had packed together. This hadn't been a decision made at the last minute. It had been organized. Carefully. Quietly. Long before they convinced me to stay home. I instinctively stepped behind one of the large decorative columns near the entrance. I wasn't hiding because I was afraid. I simply couldn't make my legs move. It felt as though I were watching strangers wearing my family's faces. Michael laughed at something Lucas said. Jennifer fixed Emma's hair before taking another picture. Karen sipped coffee while checking her phone. No one looked guilty. No one looked conflicted. No one looked like people who had just left their mother sitting alone in an empty house. Then I noticed something else. Michael reached into his backpack and pulled out a navy blue folder. My folder. The same travel folder that had sat in my bedroom closet for months. Even from a distance, I recognized the silver sticker I had placed on the front. He opened it confidently. One by one, he handed passports to everyone. My passport remained inside. For a brief second, I actually thought he might be bringing it back to me. Instead, he slipped it into his own jacket pocket. I felt physically sick. Why did he still have my passport? Why hadn't anyone returned it? The questions raced through my mind faster than I could answer them. A cheerful employee standing near the entrance smiled warmly at me. "Good morning, ma'am." I forced myself to smile back. "Good morning. Checking in today." The words caught in my throat. "No." I glanced once more toward my family. "I actually came to ask about a refund." "I'm sorry to hear that." "So am I." The employee offered a sympathetic smile. "If you'd like, guest services can help." I nodded quietly. "Thank you." As I followed the signs toward guest services, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every few steps I turned back. Some irrational part of me hoped Michael would suddenly notice me. He would run over, apologize, explain there had been some terrible misunderstanding. None of that happened. Instead, the boarding line continued moving. My family laughed together as though they hadn't broken my heart less than 12 hours earlier. Guest services occupied a quiet office overlooking the terminal. A woman in her early 50s greeted me from behind a polished wooden desk. Her name tag read Melissa Carter, Guest Relations Supervisor. "How may I help you today?" I sat down slowly. "I was supposed to sail today." "I'm sorry you're not able to." "So am I." She waited patiently. My voice cracked. "I'd like to know whether any part of my reservation can be refunded or credited." "Certainly." She turned toward her computer. "May I have your reservation number?" "It's in my folder." "No problem." "Actually," I swallowed. "My son has the folder." She looked slightly confused. "That's perfectly all right. May I have your name?" "Gloria Jenkins." Her fingers moved across the keyboard. A few seconds later, her polite smile faded. She frowned at the screen. "That's strange." "What is?" She typed again. Then she looked directly at me. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. Our system shows you've already checked in. I blinked. What? It indicates your reservation is active. That isn't possible. You haven't boarded. I haven't even entered the security area. Melissa looked back at the monitor. It also shows luggage accepted. My luggage, 2 large suitcases. I closed my eyes. Yes. They're mine. Her expression became more serious. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. So am I. My family. I took a shaky breath. They told me I was too sick to travel. She didn't interrupt. They convinced me to stay home. Another pause. I just watched them boarding my cruise. Silence filled the office. Melissa studied my face carefully. Not with suspicion, with concern. I'm very sorry. So am I. They're traveling under your reservation. I paid for everything. All of it. Every dollar. She clicked through several additional screens. The reservation includes 6 passengers. That's right. And you're listed as the primary guest. I booked it myself. She looked back toward me. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. Would you mind showing me identification? I immediately reached into my purse. Unlike my passport, my driver's license had remained in my wallet. She compared my license with the reservation. Then she looked at the screen again. Finally, she picked up the office phone. David, could you come to guest relations for a moment, please? I felt my stomach tighten. Is something wrong? I'd just like another manager to review this. Within 2 minutes, a tall man wearing a dark suit entered the office. His badge identified him as David Ramirez, operations manager. Melissa quietly explained the situation. He listened without interrupting. Then he turned toward me. Mrs. Jenkins, just so I understand. Yes. You personally purchased every ticket? Yes. You intended to travel today? Yes. You voluntarily canceled? No. You transferred ownership of the reservation? No. Did you authorize another person to represent you during check-in? I don't think so. You don't think so? My son handled some paperwork. What paperwork? I honestly don't know. David exchanged a quick glance with Melissa. It lasted only a second, but I recognized the look. Something wasn't right. He leaned forward. Mrs. Jenkins. His voice remained calm. Our records indicate someone informed us yesterday that you were medically unable to travel. I stared at him. I never said that. The note states your family would continue using the reservation with your full approval. I never approved that. He nodded slowly. I understand. And my doctor never told me I couldn't travel. Did you submit any medical documentation? No. David folded his hands. I appreciate you answering these questions. My heartbeat grew louder. Why are you asking? He hesitated. Then he said something that changed everything. Because the information we received yesterday doesn't appear to match what you're telling us today. The room became completely silent. For the first time since walking into the terminal, I no longer felt like a confused old woman who had simply missed her vacation. I felt like someone whose identity had just been used to tell a story she had never written. David stood. Mrs. Jenkins, I'd like to verify a few things before your ship departs. I looked toward the enormous cruise liner outside the window. Passengers were still boarding, including my family. What does that mean? He met my eyes. It means I don't think this conversation is over. I had spent 43 years teaching children not to panic when something unexpected happened. Take a deep breath. I used to tell my third graders whenever someone spilled paint, forgot homework, or burst into tears over a math test. Problems became easier to solve once people stopped reacting and started thinking. Now I silently repeated those same words to myself. Take a deep breath, Gloria. Think, not react. David Ramirez excused himself from the office for a moment, asking me to remain seated. Melissa stayed with me. She offered coffee. I declined. She offered water. This time I accepted. My hands shook as I lifted the paper cup. I'm sorry you're going through this, she said quietly. I keep hoping I'm misunderstanding everything. She didn't respond. Professionals learn not to jump to conclusions. Teachers do the same. Instead of making assumptions, we gather facts. I admired that about her. A few minutes later, David returned carrying a thin folder and a tablet. He closed the office door behind him. Mrs. Jenkins, thank you for your patience. Have you found something? I've found enough that I need to ask a few additional questions. I nodded. Yesterday afternoon, someone contacted our special assistance department. Who? We're still confirming that. What did they say? He opened the folder. They reported that the primary guest, Gloria Jenkins, had experienced recent medical problems. That part is true. They further stated that you had become physically unable to complete the voyage. That's false. They also requested that the remaining family members continue traveling under your reservation. I never approved that. David looked down at his notes. The caller stated you were emotionally upset and unable to speak directly with our staff. My heart sank. I never asked anyone to speak for me. He continued reading. The caller also indicated your physician recommended against long-distance travel. I shook my head immediately. No. My doctor said nothing like that. Did Dr. Harris ever advise canceling your vacation? Quite the opposite. He encouraged it. He joked about sending him pictures of whales. David slowly nodded. That's helpful. Helpful. The word sounded strangely comforting. For the first time that morning, someone seemed interested in what had actually happened instead of what others claimed had happened. He placed the folder on the desk. Mrs. Jenkins, cruise lines deal with family emergencies fairly often. I'm sure. But situations involving possible misrepresentation are very uncommon. What exactly does that mean? It means we need to determine whether we received inaccurate information. I looked toward the window. Outside, boarding continued. Time was running out. Is the ship going to leave? Not immediately. How much time do we have? Approximately 45 minutes before final clearance. 45 minutes. After 3 years of planning my dream, now depended on 45 minutes. David turned the tablet toward me. I'd like you to look at something. The screen displayed a scanned authorization form. At first glance, it appeared official. My name was typed neatly across the top. Gloria Jenkins, reservation holder. Below that, several sentences declared that I voluntarily authorized my family to proceed without me due to medical limitations. Then I saw the signature. For one terrifying second, I wondered if perhaps I had signed something without remembering. After all, Michael had brought paperwork to my house. He had asked me to review travel insurance forms. He had pointed to several places where signatures were required. But then I leaned closer. No. David looked up. No, that isn't my signature. You're certain? I've signed my name for nearly 50 years. I pointed toward the final letter. I always make a loop on the J. He studied the signature carefully. This one doesn't. It isn't mine. Melissa leaned forward. Would you be willing to provide a comparison? Of course. She handed me a blank sheet of paper. Without thinking, I signed my name exactly as I always had. Gloria Jenkins. Large capital G, rounded J. Loong finishing line beneath my last name. David placed both signatures side by side. Even without special training, the differences were obvious. The letters leaned differently. The spacing wasn't the same. The final stroke completely changed. He quietly photographed both pages. When did you first see this document? I asked. Just now. No. I mean, when was it submitted? He checked the timestamp. Yesterday at 4:18 p.m. Yesterday, 4:18. I immediately remembered where I had been. I had been sitting in my living room. Michael, Karen, Jennifer, Emma, Lucas, the family meeting, the intervention. At almost exactly that same time. Someone had been telling the cruise line I was too sick to travel. My stomach twisted. They hadn't simply convinced me to stay home. They had already informed the cruise company before I even agreed. Which meant the decision had already been made. My opinion had never truly mattered. David interrupted my thoughts. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. Who had access to your reservation information? I answered honestly. My son. And your passport? He kept it after making copies. Did he return it? I thought he had. You thought? I never checked. The words embarrassed me. How could I not have checked because I trusted him? That was the answer. I trusted him completely. David looked thoughtful. Do you know whether your son ever contacted us before yesterday? I don't. Melissa suddenly spoke. I remember something. David turned toward her. What? There was a call 3 or 4 weeks ago. She walked to another computer. After a moment, she nodded. Here. David joined her. What does it say? Reservation inquiry. Who made it? The notes identify the caller as Michael Jenkins. My pulse quickened. What was the inquiry about? Melissa read directly from the screen. Requested information regarding transferring primary guest responsibilities if original traveler became medically unable to sail. The room fell silent. 3 weeks. 3 weeks before my dizzy spell. 3 weeks before anyone claimed to worry about my health. 3 weeks before my doctor visit. 3 weeks before they begged me not to go. Michael had already been asking how to take over my reservation. I felt as though someone had punched me in the chest. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a family making difficult decisions after an unexpected medical problem. This had started weeks earlier, perhaps even months. David looked at me carefully. Mrs. Jenkins, I know. I don't want to jump to conclusions. Neither do I. But I think we're looking at more than a misunderstanding. I slowly nodded. So do I. He picked up the office phone. I'd like security to join us in guest relations. My eyes widened. Security? This has become a documentation issue. I'm not trying to get anyone arrested. Neither are we. His tone remained calm. Our responsibility is determining whether boarding occurred under accurate representations. I appreciated the way he phrased it. No accusations, only facts. A gentle knock interrupted us. A woman wearing a Navy security uniform entered the office. She introduced herself as Angela Brooks. David quickly summarized everything. Angela listened quietly before asking a single question. Has anyone verified whether the primary guest is physically present? David pointed toward me. She is now. Angela nodded once. Then we have another issue. What? The boarding system currently records Mrs. Jenkins as absent due to medical cancellation. I frowned. What does that mean? It means someone represented to us that you would not be traveling. And your reservation was modified based on that information. She looked directly at David. We should pause final embarkation until we speak with the family. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Pause final embarkation. The words hardly seemed real. Outside the office window, I watched passengers continuing toward the ship. Among them, my son, my daughter-in-law, the people I had loved without question. None of them knew I was sitting only a few hundred feet away. None of them knew the story they had created was beginning to unravel. David picked up the phone one final time. This is operations. He spoke clearly and professionally. I need Mr. Michael Jenkins and the passengers traveling under reservation 71489 escorted to guest relations before final boarding is completed. He listened for a moment. Then he answered quietly, Yes. The reservation holder is here. He hung up the phone and looked at me. It won't take them long. I stared toward the terminal doors, my heart pounding harder with every passing second. For the first time that morning, my family was about to discover that I hadn't stayed home after all. The longest 5 minutes of my life began with silence. No one in the guest relations office spoke after David made the call. Melissa quietly closed the blinds halfway across the window facing the terminal. Angela, the security supervisor, stood beside the door with a small tablet in her hands, occasionally glancing at the live boarding status. David reviewed the reservation file again, highlighting sections with a yellow marker. Meanwhile, I simply sat there. My eyes rested on the framed photograph hanging behind Melissa's desk. It showed a cruise ship sailing beneath a bright blue Alaskan sky, surrounded by snow-covered mountains and calm water that reflected every cloud. That photograph had once represented hope. Now it felt like evidence. Evidence of everything I had almost lost. I found myself wondering how many warning signs I had ignored over the years. There had been little moments, small conversations, Comments that seemed harmless at the time. About 6 months earlier, Michael had offered to simplify my finances. Mom, online banking is changing all the time, he'd said over dinner. I know. It gets confusing. It really doesn't. I could add my name as an emergency contact. I already have one. You should probably let me monitor everything. I laughed. Monitor, just in case. I've balanced a checkbook since before you were born. He smiled. I know. I appreciate the offer. Back then the conversation ended there. Or so I thought. Now I wondered whether it had ever truly ended. Another memory surfaced. 3 months before the cruise, Karen had insisted I write down all my passwords. What if something happens to you? I'll change them if something happens to me. She laughed nervously. I'm serious. So am I. Again. It had seemed like concern. Everything had been wrapped in concern. That was what made it so difficult to recognize. Manipulation rarely introduces itself as manipulation. Sometimes it arrives dressed as love. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Angela stepped into the hallway. They're coming. My pulse immediately quickened. I could hear voices outside, footsteps, rolling suitcases. Then Michael's voice. There has to be some mistake. Another employee answered calmly. Sir, guest relations simply needs to clarify several items regarding your reservation. We're about to miss boarding. The ship has been notified. A moment later, the office door opened. Michael walked in first, still smiling, still confident. That smile disappeared the instant he saw me. His face turned completely white. Mom. Behind him, Jennifer froze. Karen stopped so suddenly that Emma nearly bumped into her. Lucas looked from one adult to another without understanding what was happening. For several seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The silence felt almost unreal. Finally, Michael managed to say, "What are you doing here?" The question was so absurd that I almost laughed. Instead, I answered quietly, I think I should be asking you that. His eyes darted toward David, then toward the folder on the desk, then back to me. I thought, he stopped himself. You thought what? I asked. I thought you stayed home. I did. I mean, his voice faltered. I thought you weren't coming. I wasn't. Karen finally found her voice. Mom. Tears immediately filled her eyes. We can explain. David stepped forward politely. Mr. Jenkins. Yes. I'm David Ramirez, operations manager. Michael forced himself to smile. Nice to meet you. I wish it were under different circumstances. So do I. David gestured toward several chairs. Please have a seat. No offense, Michael replied, but we're trying to catch our cruise. David remained calm. Your cruise will wait a few moments. That sentence clearly surprised everyone. Jennifer spoke next. Is there some problem? There are several questions regarding the reservation. Michael answered before anyone else could. I already explained everything yesterday. David nodded. That's precisely why we're here. Michael looked confused. What does that mean? It means new information has come to our attention. Karen looked toward me again. Mom? I didn't answer. For the first time in years, I wanted them to experience uncertainty, just for a few minutes. The same uncertainty they had created for me. David opened the reservation folder. Mr. Jenkins, yesterday afternoon, someone contacted our special assistance department. Yes. Was that you? Michael hesitated. Yes. You informed us your mother was medically unable to travel. That's correct. I spoke quietly. No. Every head turned toward me. Michael frowned. Mom, I was never medically unable to travel. You almost fainted. I became dehydrated, David continued. You also informed us Mrs. Jenkins wished to transfer use of the reservation. Michael nodded. She agreed. I looked directly into my son's eyes. I never agreed. His expression changed, not dramatically, just enough for a mother to notice. He was thinking, calculating, searching for another explanation. You were emotional, he said. You don't remember the conversation. I stared at him in disbelief. What conversation? The one at your house. I remember every word. Karen suddenly interrupted. Michael. He ignored her. David calmly asked another question. Did Mrs. Jenkins sign an authorization? Yes. David placed the document on the table. This one, yes. He turned toward me. Mrs. Jenkins. That isn't my signature. Michael laughed nervously. Mom, it is. No. You were upset. I know my own handwriting. David placed my comparison signature beside the document. Could you explain the differences? Michael looked down. For the first time since entering the room, he had no immediate answer. Jennifer leaned closer to him. What differences? He didn't respond. Karen's breathing became noticeably faster. She reached for Michael's arm. What did you do? He shook her hand away. Nothing. David spoke carefully. We also located an earlier inquiry made approximately 3 weeks ago. Michael looked up immediately. What inquiry? You asked about transferring primary guest responsibilities. The room became silent again. Jennifer slowly turned toward her husband. You called them 3 weeks ago. He hesitated. I was just asking questions. You told me this only started after your mom got dizzy. It did. David glanced at his notes. The inquiry occurred 23 days before the medical appointment. Karen whispered, Oh my God. Michael immediately turned toward her. Don't. She stared back. You told me it was because of the doctor's visit. I was preparing. For what? In case something happened. Karen stood up. No. You said. She stopped speaking altogether. Then she looked at me. Real tears now streamed down her face. Mom, I swear. I didn't know. The words hung heavily in the room. I studied her face carefully. For the first time that morning, I believed her. Not because she cried, because she looked genuinely shocked by the timeline. Jennifer looked equally stunned. She slowly faced her husband. You planned this. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I was protecting Mom. 3 weeks before she got dizzy. He had no answer. Emma finally spoke from the corner of the room. Dad? Her voice was barely above a whisper. You said Grandma wanted us to have this trip. Michael closed his eyes. I know. You said she was happy. I thought she would be. Emma looked toward me. Grandma? I'm so sorry. That simple apology hurt more than everything else combined. Because it was honest. Lucas tugged on Jennifer's sleeve. Mom? Are we not going on vacation? Jennifer couldn't answer. She was staring at Michael as though seeing him for the first time. David closed the reservation folder. Mr. Jenkins. Michael looked up. I need to ask one final question. What? When you informed our staff that Mrs. Jenkins had approved these arrangements, David paused just long enough for every person in the room to understand the importance of the next words. Were you telling us what your mother actually said? Another pause. Or were you telling us what you believed was best for her? Michael looked around the room. At Karen. At Jennifer. At Emma. At Lucas. Finally, his eyes met mine. For the first time that day, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not confidence, not anger, not even fear. I saw a man realizing that the story he had carefully constructed for weeks had collapsed in less than 15 minutes. And there was no longer a single person left in the room willing to help him hold it together. No one spoke for what felt like an entire minute. The silence inside the guest relations office was unlike any silence I had ever experienced. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't awkward. It was the sound of a lie running out of places to hide. Michael stared at the floor. Karen wiped tears from her cheeks. Jennifer folded her arms across her chest, no longer standing beside her husband. She had taken 2 small steps away from him without realizing it, as though some instinct inside her needed distance. Emma quietly held Lucas's hand. David finally broke the silence. Mr. Jenkins. Michael looked up. I'm giving you another opportunity to answer my previous question. Michael inhaled slowly. I was trying to help my mother. David remained expressionless. Please answer the question directly. Michael closed his eyes for a second. I believed I was doing what was best. Did Mrs. Jenkins authorize you to tell our staff she was medically unable to travel? No. The word barely escaped his lips. Karen covered her mouth. Jennifer looked at him in disbelief. David continued calmly. Did Mrs. Jenkins authorize you to sign this document? No. Did Mrs. Jenkins ask you to continue using the reservation without her? Michael hesitated. No, those 3 letters changed everything. No shouting, no dramatic accusations. Just one honest answer that collapsed every explanation he had offered until then. Angela made a brief note on her tablet. David folded the authorization form and placed it back into the file. Thank you. Michael suddenly looked desperate. But listen. David gently raised a hand. I'll certainly listen. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Michael ran both hands through his hair. My mom almost never spends money on herself. I frowned. What does that have to do with this? He turned toward me. You would have wasted this trip. The words stunned everyone. Jennifer stared at him. Wasted it. He spoke faster now as though convincing himself. You've never been on a cruise. No. You would have stayed in your cabin reading books. I like reading. You don't drink. No. You don't gamble. No. You don't stay out dancing. I looked at him quietly. So. He spread his arms. We would have actually enjoyed everything. The room became completely still. Even David looked surprised. For the first time. Michael wasn't pretending this had been about my health. He was telling the truth. His truth. I spoke softly. So you decided my vacation belonged to someone who would appreciate it more. He sighed with frustration. Mom, that's not what I meant. It sounds exactly like what you meant. You wouldn't have done half the excursions. Did you ask me? No. Did you ask whether I wanted to watch whales? No. Did you ask whether I wanted to stand on a glacier? No. Did you ask whether your father and I spent 40 years dreaming about Alaska? His eyes dropped again. No. Jennifer slowly turned toward him. You told me she wanted us to create memories. I thought she did. You said she insisted. I thought she'd understand. You lied. He immediately looked defensive. I didn't lie. You absolutely lied. Karen suddenly spoke. Michael. Her voice trembled. You told me Mom cried because she was relieved. He remained silent. You said she finally realized traveling was too dangerous. Still nothing. Karen's shoulders slumped. You never told me she wanted to go. I was trying to avoid an argument. She shook her head. No. You were trying to avoid hearing the answer. I watched my children arguing, but strangely I no longer felt anger. Instead, I felt sadness. A deep sadness that reached far beyond this cruise. Because I finally understood something. Michael hadn't become selfish overnight. This wasn't one terrible decision. It was the result of years of believing that his judgment mattered more than everyone else's, including mine. David interrupted gently. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. I need to ask you several questions unrelated to the cruise. Of course. Has anyone recently asked you to sign financial documents? I blinked. Financial documents. Anything involving your property investments or accounts. I immediately thought of the papers Michael had brought over. He asked me to sign some travel paperwork. Did you read every page? I believed I did. Would you recognize the documents if you saw them again? I think so. David nodded thoughtfully. This may seem unrelated, but it's important. Why? He exchanged another glance with Angela. There have been a few details in this reservation that concern me. My stomach tightened. What details? The person who contacted us seemed unusually familiar with your legal documentation. I frowned. What do you mean? They referenced your emergency contacts, my insurance information, and your financial travel coverage. I looked confused. I don't even remember those policy numbers. David nodded. Exactly. That answer sent a chill through me. How had Michael known details that even I couldn't immediately remember? Unless he had looked through every document inside my travel folder, not just the cruise tickets, everything, my insurance, Emergency contacts, medical information, copies of identification, bank information used for payment. Everything. I suddenly remembered something else. When Michael had returned my folder after making copies, it had seemed slightly thicker than before. At the time, I assumed he'd simply reorganized the papers. Now I wasn't so sure. David asked another question. Mrs. Jenkins, do you keep important legal documents at home? Yes. Where? In a fireproof safe. Who knows the combination? I answered without thinking. Only me. Then I hesitated. Actually, everyone looked toward me. I once asked Michael to open it while I was visiting Robert in the hospital. When? About 6 years ago. Has the combination changed since then? I froze. No, it hadn't. A memory surfaced so suddenly it made my heart pound. Last month, Michael had stopped by while I was volunteering at church. He later mentioned watering my flowers because I'd forgotten. I had thanked him. But, had he gone inside? He had a spare key. He certainly could have. I looked up slowly. My safe. David watched me carefully. What about it? I need to check something. What? I don't know yet. He nodded. Would you like us to contact local law enforcement? I quickly shook my head. No, not yet. I struggled to organize my thoughts. I suddenly realized there may be more to this than the cruise. Michael immediately interrupted. There isn't. Everyone looked toward him. There isn't anything else. His answer came too quickly, too forcefully, too automatically. For the first time since I'd walked into the terminal, I noticed genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of missing the cruise, not fear of being embarrassed. Something deeper, something personal, as though the conversation had drifted dangerously close to a subject he desperately hoped no one would discover. David noticed it too. He quietly closed the reservation folder. Then he folded his hands on the desk. Mr. Jenkins. Michael swallowed. Yes. I haven't asked about anything other than this cruise. Another pause. So why did you feel the need to assure us there isn't anything else? No one answered. Outside the office window, I could hear the ship's horn sound once across the harbor. Boarding was nearly complete. Yet somehow, the Alaska cruise no longer felt like the biggest story unfolding that morning. For the first time, I began to wonder whether taking my vacation had never been the real objective. Perhaps it had simply been the first move in a much larger plan. The cruise ship sounded its horn again. A deep, echoing blast rolled across the harbor, vibrating through the office windows. Every passenger in the terminal knew what it meant. Final boarding. Ordinarily, that sound would have filled me with excitement. Instead, it reminded me how quickly a person's entire life could change. David looked toward the window, then back at me. Mrs. Jenkins, I need to explain your options. I nodded. I'm listening. As the purchaser and primary guest, you remain the legal holder of this reservation. Michael shifted in his chair. David continued before he could interrupt. Until we resolve the documentation issue, no transfer of ownership is recognized. Michael finally spoke. So what happens now? David answered without emotion. That depends on Mrs. Jenkins. For the first time all morning, every pair of eyes turned toward me. Not toward Michael, not toward the cruise staff. Toward me, the woman whose voice everyone had ignored until that moment. I took a slow breath. I have one question first. David nodded. Of course. I looked directly at Michael. When exactly did you decide I wasn't going on this trip? He hesitated. The truth. He rubbed his forehead. A few days ago. I shook my head. No. You called the cruise line 3 weeks ago. He looked away. So I'll ask again. When did you decide? Another long silence. Finally, he whispered, about a month ago. Jennifer inhaled sharply. A month. Michael didn't answer her. He looked only at me. I started thinking about it. Thinking about what? You traveling alone. No. I leaned forward. You weren't thinking about me traveling. You were thinking about me not traveling. His shoulders slumped. Yes. The honesty hurt more than another lie would have, because it confirmed something I had been slowly realizing all morning. He hadn't reacted to my dizziness. He had been waiting for an excuse. I turned toward Karen. Did you know? She immediately shook her head. No. When did Michael first talk to you? The day after your doctor's appointment. And before that, nothing. She began crying again. I swear, Mom, I believed him. He told me Dr. Harris thought the trip was dangerous. I nodded slowly. I believe you. Michael looked surprised. You do? I believe Karen. Then I looked at Jennifer. What about you? She swallowed. He told me you had decided to let us use the reservation. And did you ask me? No. Why not? She lowered her eyes. I should have. Yes. You should have. There was no anger in my voice anymore. Only disappointment. Sometimes disappointment weighs more than rage. David quietly closed the file. Mrs. Jenkins, based on everything we've reviewed, our company considers the authorization invalid. What does that mean? It means your reservation is restored. Michael looked up quickly. So, we can still go? David turned toward him. No. His voice remained polite. But not under the current circumstances. What? The reservation requires the participation or valid authorization of the primary guest. Michael looked stunned. So the cruise is cancelled? Not necessarily. He looked toward me. Mrs. Jenkins still has several choices. I stared at the photographs of Alaska hanging on the wall. Snow-covered peaks, blue glaciers, calm water. 3 years of dreaming. 3 years of saving. 3 years of imagining myself standing on the deck with Robert's old binoculars around my neck. Could I still go? The thought seemed almost impossible after everything that had happened. David spoke gently. The ship can accommodate a short delay if necessary. I looked at him. You'd do that. This situation was not created by you. I felt tears gathering in my eyes. No one in my family had said those words, not once. Instead, they had spent 2 days convincing me everything was my fault, that I was selfish, too old, too fragile, too stubborn. Yet a complete stranger had looked me in the eye and reminded me of something simple. This wasn't my fault. I reached into my purse and removed my driver's license. Then I smiled faintly. I still don't have my passport. David nodded. We've already requested it. Angela stepped outside. Less than a minute later, she returned carrying my navy blue travel folder. My passport rested inside exactly where I had left it. She placed the folder in front of me. I believe this belongs to you. I ran my fingers across the familiar cover. For reasons I couldn't explain, touching that folder nearly made me cry. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself. I opened it slowly. Everything appeared to be inside. Cruise documents, insurance papers, excursion tickets, maps, packing lists. Then I noticed something different. A clear plastic sleeve had been added near the back. Inside were photocopies. Copies of my passport. Copies of my driver's license. Copies of my insurance information. Copies of the credit card I had used for payment. I looked up immediately. I didn't make these. David leaned forward. May I? I handed him the sleeve. He carefully examined each page. Were you aware these copies existed? No. Did you authorize anyone to make them? I authorized copies of my passport. And the rest? No. He placed the sleeve back into the folder. His expression became noticeably more serious. I recommend you review every financial account connected to these documents. Michael immediately spoke. That's unnecessary. Every head turned toward him. David answered calmly. I'll decide what's necessary from a security standpoint. Michael fell silent. I looked at the copies again. Then another memory surfaced. About 2 weeks earlier, Michael had casually asked whether I still used the same investment advisor Robert and I had trusted for years. At the time, it had seemed like ordinary conversation. Now, nothing seemed ordinary anymore. I quietly closed the folder. Then I looked at my son. I have another question. He nodded. All right. If I had never come to this terminal today, his eyes filled with tears. Would you have ever told me the truth? He didn't answer. I waited. So did everyone else. Finally, after nearly 30 seconds, he whispered, I don't know. That answer told me everything. Not yes, not no, just, I don't know. A man who couldn't promise he would have confessed. Emma suddenly began crying. She walked across the room until she stood beside my chair. I'm sorry, Grandma. I wrapped my arm around her. You have nothing to apologize for. I thought you wanted us to go. I know. She buried her face against my shoulder. I would have stayed with you. I know you would. Lucas quietly joined us. So would I. I kissed the top of both their heads. Children often recognize honesty faster than adults do. David respectfully gave us a moment before speaking again. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. The decision is entirely yours. He slid the reservation packet toward me. You may continue your vacation. You may postpone it. Or you may cancel it altogether. I rested my hand on the folder. 3 years ago, I had promised Robert I would stop postponing my dreams. This morning, my own family had nearly convinced me to break that promise. I slowly stood. Then I looked through the office window toward the massive ship waiting at the pier. For the first time all day, I wasn't wondering whether my family deserved to board. I was asking myself a much more important question. Did I still believe I deserved to? I looked at the cruise ship one last time. Its white hull stretched across the harbor like a floating city, sunlight finally breaking through the morning clouds and reflecting off the windows. Passengers leaned over the upper decks, waving toward family members still standing on the pier. 3 years. 3 years of saving. 3 years of dreaming. 3 years of imagining this exact moment. And somehow, despite everything that had happened during the past 2 hours, my dream was still waiting for me. David quietly stepped beside me. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. We need your decision. I smiled sadly. I already know. He waited. So do I. I turned around and faced everyone in the room. Michael, Karen, Jennifer, Emma, Lucas, my family. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I wasn't looking at them through the eyes of a mother, desperate to keep everyone happy. I was looking at them as Gloria Jenkins, a woman, a widow, a retired teacher, a human being who deserved the same respect she had spent her entire life giving to others. I took a slow breath. I'm going. The room remained silent. Then Emma smiled through her tears. Karen closed her eyes in relief. Jennifer nodded softly. Only Michael looked stunned. You're... He stopped. You're really going, yes. By yourself? Yes. You shouldn't. I looked directly at him. That's no longer your decision. His face tightened. But after everything that's happened... Exactly. Mom? No. I raised my hand gently. You've made enough decisions for me. Those words seemed to strike him harder than anything else I had said. David immediately picked up the reservation packet. We can complete your boarding immediately. What about the others? I asked. He answered professionally. Because the reservation documentation was submitted under false information, we must review the remaining passengers' eligibility. Michael stood up quickly. So we're not going? I'm afraid the reservation is currently suspended. What? Pending corporate review. Jennifer looked shocked. Does that mean? David nodded. I'm afraid today's voyage isn't possible under these tickets. Lucas frowned. But Grandma's going. Yes. And we're staying. No one answered him. Children deserve honesty. Unfortunately, adults don't always provide it. Emma slowly walked over to me. Grandma. Yes, sweetheart. I hope you see whales. I smiled. I hope so too. And glaciers. I've always wanted to. She reached into her backpack. I made something. She handed me a folded envelope decorated with tiny blue snowflakes. I was going to give it to you on the ship. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handmade card. The front showed a drawing of a cruise ship beneath enormous mountains. Across the top she had written, "For Grandma's biggest adventure." Inside another message appeared in neat handwriting. Grandpa would be so proud of you for finally taking your dream trip. Please don't forget to tell me every story when you get home. Love, Emma. The tears I'd been holding back finally escaped. I hugged her tightly. I'll tell you every single story. I promise. Lucas looked disappointed. I made you something too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny polished stone. I found this near the river. He placed it in my hand. For good luck. I smiled through my tears. I'll carry it with me. I want you to. Children have an extraordinary ability to separate truth from loyalty. Neither Emma nor Lucas defended what had happened. They simply loved their grandmother, exactly as love should be. Karen slowly approached me next. I don't deserve forgiveness. No, I don't. I know. She began crying again. I should have called you. Yes. I should have asked what you wanted. Yes. I believed Michael because… She couldn't finish. Because he's your older brother, I said quietly. She nodded. And because he sounded certain. Another nod. I gently touched her arm. Being confident doesn't make someone right. I know that now. I hope you remember it. I will. Jennifer came forward after Karen. She looked exhausted, ashamed. I owe you an apology. You do. I trusted my husband instead of asking you one simple question. Which question? She whispered. What do you want, Gloria? I smiled sadly. That would have been enough. She nodded. I'll regret that for a very long time. I imagine you will. Finally, only Michael remained. Everyone else had apologized. He hadn't. He simply stood near the doorway staring at the floor. I walked toward him. For a brief moment I remembered the little boy who used to scrape his knees riding bicycles, the teenager who proudly brought home his first paycheck, the young man who cried at his father's funeral. I still loved that boy, but the man standing before me had made choices. Real choices. He slowly looked up. I'm sorry. The words sounded sincere, yet something felt unfinished. I waited. I thought… He struggled. I thought I was protecting everyone. Everyone. You. No. I shook my head. You were protecting the version of life you wanted. He looked confused. What do you mean? You never asked what I wanted. I thought… I know. You thought… You decided. You planned. You spoke for me. You signed for me. You canceled my dream. Every sentence landed quietly. No shouting, no insults, just facts. He closed his eyes. I know. No, I answered gently. I don't think you do. He looked at me again. I'll make this right. Can you… He didn't answer. Because we both knew some things cannot simply be repaired with promises. David respectfully interrupted. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. The gangway will remain open another 10 minutes. I nodded. I'm ready. Angela handed me my boarding documents. Melissa smiled warmly. I hope Alaska is everything you've dreamed. I smiled back. I think it already is. She looked puzzled. What do you mean? I glanced around the room. This morning I almost believed I was too old to trust myself. I looked down at my boarding pass. I don't believe that anymore. David personally escorted me toward the private boarding entrance. As we walked through the terminal, hundreds of passengers smiled politely. None of them knew the story that had unfolded inside guest relations. To them, I was simply another traveler, beginning a vacation. Perhaps that was enough. Halfway down the hallway, I heard someone call my name. Mom. I turned. Michael had run after us. Security allowed him to approach but remained nearby. He stopped several feet away. His breathing was heavy. I need to ask you something. I waited. Will you ever trust me again? The question lingered between us. I looked at my son for a long moment before answering. I honestly don't know. His shoulders dropped. Then I added quietly, but trust isn't something I can give you today. It's something you'll have to earn. He nodded once. No arguments, no excuses, just silent acceptance. I turned and continued walking. As I stepped onto the boarding bridge, the cool ocean breeze touched my face. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt lighter. The cruise wasn't simply beginning. Something much more important had begun. For the first time since Robert died, I wasn't walking toward someone else's expectations. I was walking toward my own future, and I had absolutely no intention of turning around. The first evening aboard the ship, I stood alone on the promenade deck as Savannah disappeared into the distance. The shoreline gradually faded beneath a blanket of gray clouds until the only thing left was open water. For years, I had imagined sharing this moment with Robert. He would have leaned against the railing with his old binoculars hanging around his neck, pointing excitedly toward dolphins or seabirds. He would have made terrible jokes about seasickness before insisting we order dessert before dinner, because as he always said, at our age we start with dessert. Instead, I was alone. Or at least I thought I was. You picked the best place to watch sail away. The voice startled me. I turned to find a woman about my age standing a few feet away. She wore a navy sweater and a cream-colored knit scarf despite the mild weather. She smiled kindly. I hope I didn't interrupt. Not at all. I'm Evelyn. Gloria. She extended her hand. It's nice to meet you. You too. For several minutes, we simply watched the water without speaking. Some silences are uncomfortable. Others are healing. This one felt healing. Finally, Evelyn asked, "First cruise?" I laughed softly. Is it that obvious? A little. What gave me away? You've spent the last 10 minutes looking at the horizon instead of your phone. I smiled. I suppose that's true. My husband used to do that. The past tense caught my attention. I'm sorry. She nodded gently. 5 years ago. My husband passed away 16 years ago. I'm sorry. We exchanged the kind of understanding that only widows truly recognize. No explanations were necessary. No awkward sympathy, just quiet understanding. Eventually she asked, "What finally convinced you to take the trip?" The question lingered in the air. I considered giving the polite answer. I've always wanted to see Alaska. Instead, perhaps because she was a stranger. Or perhaps because strangers sometimes feel safer than family. I told her the truth. My family tried to stop me. She turned toward me. What happened? So I told her. Not every detail. Not yet. But enough. The doctor's appointment. The intervention. The cruise terminal. The forged authorization. The confrontation. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she leaned against the railing and quietly said, "My children almost did something similar." I stared at her. They did. They wanted me declared incapable of managing my finances after Harold died. My heart skipped. What happened? They thought they were helping. Were they? She smiled sadly. No. They were helping themselves. I felt a chill despite the fresh sea air. What did you do? I hired an attorney. Those 4 words immediately brought David's concerns back into my mind. The copied documents, the questions about my safe, the unexpected interest in my financial records. Until that moment, I'd been trying not to think about any of it. Evelyn continued. I learned something difficult. What? When people begin making decisions for you without your permission, they rarely stop with one decision. Her words settled heavily in my chest. The cruise, the copied documents, the travel folder, the safe, the conversations about my bank accounts. For the first time, all the pieces seemed connected. Not proven, but connected. That evening I couldn't sleep. My cabin was beautiful. A balcony overlooked the dark Atlantic Ocean. The bed was far more comfortable than I expected. Someone had even left a small welcome gift of chocolate-covered strawberries on the table. Everything should have felt magical. Instead, my mind kept replaying one memory after another. Michael asking about online banking, Karen requesting my passwords, the photocopies, the phone call 3 weeks before my doctor's appointment. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I finally reached for my phone. I hadn't turned it on since boarding. The screen immediately filled with notifications. 23 missed calls, 14 voicemail messages, 37 text messages, almost all from Michael. Mom, please answer. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. Please don't shut me out. Call me, please. Mixed among them were messages from Karen. I love you. I'm ashamed. Please enjoy your trip. We'll talk whenever you're ready. Jennifer had sent only one. I should have asked you instead of believing everyone else. I'm deeply sorry. Then I noticed a message from someone unexpected. It was from David Ramirez. Mrs. Jenkins, I apologize for contacting you during your vacation. There is no emergency, but I recommend you call me when convenient regarding several documents reviewed after your departure. My heartbeat quickened. Several documents. Not one. Several. I looked at the clock. It was still early enough on the East Coast that the terminal offices would be open. I hesitated only a moment before calling. David answered almost immediately. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. I hope I'm not disturbing your vacation. You mentioned documents. Yes. His tone remained professional. After you boarded, we completed our internal review. And we located additional correspondence submitted from the same email address used for the authorization form. I sat upright in bed. What kind of correspondence? It involved insurance coverage. I frowned. My travel insurance? Yes. What about it? The sender requested information regarding reimbursement in the event of permanent medical incapacity. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? There was also an inquiry regarding whether future cruises purchased under your customer profile could be transferred to an immediate family member. I couldn't speak. David continued carefully. I'm not suggesting criminal intent, but these inquiries extended beyond this vacation. I closed my eyes. He had been planning, not just this cruise. He had been gathering information about what might happen if I became permanently unable to travel. Or if someone believed I was. I thought you should know. Thank you. I also strongly recommend meeting with your attorney as soon as you return. I intend to. Walked out onto my balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath a sky filled with stars. Robert used to tell me that whenever life became confusing, I should separate facts from fears. Facts first, feelings second. So I began listing the facts. Fact. Michael had contacted the cruise line weeks before my illness. Fact. He had signed my name without permission. Fact. He had copied personal documents I never authorized him to copy. Fact. He had asked questions about financial matters long before this trip. Fact. Someone had begun creating a version of me that appeared increasingly incapable of managing my own affairs. I looked toward the dark horizon. The cruise no longer represented an escape. It had become something else. A pause. A chance to think clearly before making the next decisions of my life. When I returned home, I wasn't simply going to have a difficult conversation with my family. I was going to learn exactly how much access they had already gained to the life Robert and I had spent 41 years building. And this time, I wasn't going to assume anything. I was going to verify everything. By the third morning, the ocean had begun to heal something inside me. I hadn't expected that. When people imagine healing, they often picture dramatic breakthroughs, a single conversation, one heartfelt apology, or a perfect sunrise that somehow changes everything. Real healing wasn't like that. It happened quietly. It happened while sipping coffee on my balcony as the sun rose over endless water. It happened while listening to waves strike the hull in a slow, steady rhythm. It happened because for the first time in decades, no one needed anything from me. No phone calls asking for favors. No grocery runs. No last-minute babysitting. No solving someone else's crisis. There was only me. The first couple of days felt strangely uncomfortable. Every time my phone vibrated, I instinctively reached for it. Then I remembered I didn't have to answer. I wasn't being cruel. I was giving myself something I had given everyone else my entire life. Time. That afternoon, I joined a photography excursion, led by one of the ship's naturalists. I almost skipped it. Part of me kept thinking Robert should have been standing beside me. Another part whispered that I didn't belong. Then I remembered something he used to say whenever I doubted myself. If you're waiting until you're completely ready, Gloria, you'll spend your whole life waiting. So I went. There were about 20 people in the group, retired couples, a father traveling with his adult daughter, 3 women celebrating a retirement together, a quiet widower named Frank who carried an expensive camera and apologized every time someone accidentally walked into one of his photographs. Within an hour, everyone was laughing together. Not because anything extraordinary happened, because nobody was pretending to be perfect. One woman admitted she'd forgotten her camera battery. Frank accidentally photographed his own shoes. I spent nearly 5 minutes trying to photograph an eagle that turned out to be a weather vane. For the first time since boarding the ship, I laughed. A genuine laugh, not the polite kind. The kind that begins in your stomach and surprises you halfway through. Evelyn looked at me and smiled. There you are. What do you mean? The woman who booked this cruise. I hadn't realized she was right. Somewhere between the confrontation at the terminal and the phone call with David, I had stopped being a traveler. I had become an investigator, someone constantly searching for the next betrayal. The ocean reminded me that life still contained beauty. Late that afternoon, the captain announced whales had been spotted off the port side. Within seconds, passengers rushed toward the railings. I grabbed Robert's binoculars from my cabin and hurried outside. There, someone pointed toward the water. A massive humpback whale rose gracefully above the surface before crashing back into the sea. Everyone gasped. Then another appeared. Then another. My eyes filled with tears. Not because of the whales, because Robert should have seen them. I lifted the binoculars and whispered, "We finally made it." The wind carried the words away. For just a moment, I could almost imagine him standing beside me. That evening, I returned to my cabin to find another message waiting on my phone. This one wasn't from Michael. It was from my attorney, Rebecca Lawson. Gloria. David Ramirez contacted my office with your permission after you listed me as your legal representative in the reservation documents. I have not taken any action yet, but after reviewing the information he shared, I recommend we meet immediately after your return. There are several protective steps we should discuss regarding your estate planning and financial security. Enjoy your trip. We'll handle everything when you come home. Rebecca. I read the message twice. Rebecca had represented Robert and me for nearly 20 years. She wasn't dramatic. If she believed immediate action was necessary, then something truly deserved attention. Instead of feeling frightened, however, I felt strangely calm. Perhaps because I finally had a plan. For days I had been reacting. Now I would prepare. I opened the notebook I had packed for journaling. On the first blank page, I wrote one sentence. Things I must verify when I get home. Beneath it, I began making a list. Check the fireproof safe. Change every password. Replace every spare key. Review all bank accounts. Review investment accounts. Check beneficiary designations. Review insurance policies. Meet with Rebecca. Speak with Dr. Harris about exactly what was discussed after my appointment. I stared at the list for a long time. It looked overwhelming. Then I remembered how I used to teach multiplication to third graders. One problem at a time. You didn't solve 20 questions simultaneously. You solved the first one, then the second, then the third. Life worked the same way. The next morning, our ship entered Alaskan waters. I stepped onto the balcony before sunrise. Towering mountains stretched across the horizon. Snow covered their peaks, even though summer flowers bloomed along the shoreline below. The air felt crisp and impossibly clean. It was more beautiful than any brochure had promised. I stood there for nearly an hour without speaking. Eventually, Evelyn joined me. "I thought I'd find you here." I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. She looked toward the mountains. "Worth the wait?" I smiled. "More than worth it." She studied me for a moment. "You look different." "I feel different." "In what way?" I considered the question carefully. "When I boarded this ship, I thought I had lost my family. And now, I think I lost an illusion." She nodded slowly. "That's not the same thing." No, it isn't. My children still exist. They're still my family. But the version of them I believed in, I looked toward the mountains. That version is gone. She gently touched my arm. Sometimes truth hurts less than pretending. I smiled. I think you're right. That afternoon, we visited a small coastal town. Tourists filled the streets buying handmade carvings and postcards. I wandered into a tiny bookstore tucked between two souvenir shops. Near the entrance stood a wooden sign. It read, "The best journeys don't change your location, they change your perspective." I laughed quietly. Then I bought the sign. Not because I needed another decoration for my house, because it described exactly what had happened. The cruise had already become more than a vacation. It had become proof that I could still build a meaningful life, even after discovering painful truths. Later that evening, as the ship sailed past enormous blue glaciers glowing beneath the evening sun, I looked out across the frozen landscape and realized something unexpected. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I wasn't imagining arguments. I wasn't rehearsing angry speeches. I was thinking about protection. Protecting my future. Protecting Robert's legacy. Protecting the independence we had worked so hard to build together. And when I finally returned home, that quiet determination would become far more powerful than anger ever could have been. When the cruise finally returned to Savannah 12 days later, I felt like I was stepping into a different life. The terminal looked exactly as I remembered it. The same glass entrance, the same luggage carts, the same cheerful employees welcoming passengers home. But I wasn't the same woman who had boarded there. I had left believing my greatest loss was a stolen vacation. I returned understanding that the real loss had been my unquestioning trust. Rebecca Lawson was waiting near the arrivals area. She spotted me almost immediately. "Gloria," she smiled warmly and gave me a careful hug. "You look rested." "I feel stronger." "I was hoping you'd say that." She picked up one of my suitcases before I could protest. "We have a busy afternoon." I suspected as much. As we walked toward the parking garage, she glanced at me. "Are you ready?" "I don't know." "That's honest. But I'm ready enough." Instead of driving me home, Rebecca headed directly to her office downtown. She had already prepared a conference room with several folders spread neatly across a large oak table. Coffee waited beside them. "So," I sat down. "Where do we begin?" Rebecca folded her hands. "With facts." I smiled. I've started liking that word. It keeps emotions from making expensive decisions. She opened the first folder. "I've already contacted your bank." I looked surprised. "They cooperated." "You authorized me several years ago under your estate planning documents." I nodded. I'd forgotten. Fortunately, I hadn't. She slid several printed statements across the table. I wanted to compare recent activity. I carefully examined them. Nothing looked unusual. Monthly utilities, insurance payments, church donations, property taxes, the same predictable expenses I'd made for years. "I don't see anything." "Neither did I," she smiled. "At first." Then she turned to another page. "Notice these. 3 inquiries. No money had been withdrawn. No accounts closed. Only online requests. Request to add secondary contact. Request for beneficiary information. Request regarding durable financial power of attorney." All 3 had occurred within the previous 6 weeks. I looked up. "I never requested these." "I know." The bank confirmed none of them were completed. "Why not?" Rebecca smiled faintly. "Because each request failed security verification." Relief washed over me. "What happened?" "The person answering the security questions couldn't answer all of them correctly." My heartbeat quickened. "Do they know who called?" "They identified themselves as Michael Jenkins." I stared silently at the papers. No missing money, no stolen accounts, just attempts, repeated attempts. Rebecca continued. "He never gained access." "But he tried." "Yes." My chest tightened. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I had spent most of the cruise wondering whether I had imagined everything, whether grief and betrayal had made me suspicious. Now the facts sat directly in front of me. Not accusations, not assumptions. Records. Documented attempts. Rebecca waited quietly before speaking again. There's more. I nodded. I figured. She opened another folder. This concerns your fireproof safe. I frowned. My safe. You mentioned believing Michael still knew the combination. Yes. I strongly recommend changing it immediately. I will. But first, she slid a yellow legal pad toward me. I'd like you to write down everything you believe is currently inside. I began making a list. Property deed, Robert's military medals, our wills, insurance policies, investment certificates, birth certificates, marriage certificate, several pieces of jewelry inherited from my mother, savings bonds, a small envelope containing handwritten letters Robert wrote while traveling for work decades earlier. When I finished, Rebecca nodded. We'll compare the list after you get home. What if something's missing? Then we'll determine when it disappeared. She paused. Not before. I appreciated her caution. She refused to assume guilt. Only facts. Again, facts. My phone buzzed. Michael. Calling. I stared at the screen. Rebecca remained silent. Finally, I answered. Hello? His voice sounded exhausted. Mom? I'm listening. Can we meet? Today. Please. I glanced toward Rebecca. She nodded almost imperceptibly. I answered, Come to my house at 6. I'll be there. He hesitated. Thank you. After ending the call, Rebecca asked, How are you feeling? I honestly don't know. That's normal. I thought I'd be angrier. And I'm mostly tired. She smiled gently. Sometimes disappointment is more exhausting than anger. That evening, I unlocked my front door for the first time since leaving for Alaska. The house smelled exactly as it always had. Lavender, old books, fresh wood polish, home. I walked directly toward the hallway closet. The fireproof safe sat exactly where it always had. Nothing appeared disturbed. I entered the combination. The heavy door clicked open. For several long seconds, I simply stared. Everything seemed normal. Slowly, carefully. I compared each item against the list I'd written. The deed, present. The wills, present. The medals, present. The jewelry, present. The letters, present. I breathed a sigh of relief. Then, near the back, I noticed something unfamiliar. A plain white envelope. No writing, no postage, no return address. I frowned. I certainly hadn't placed it there. I opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of photocopies. The first page immediately caught my attention. It was a blank, durable financial power of attorney form, unsigned. Behind it were printed instructions explaining how to transfer authority over financial decisions if an individual became medically incapacitated. I slowly flipped through the remaining pages. Several sections had yellow sticky notes attached. One note read, Mom signs here. Another, need witness. Another, notary. I felt cold, very cold. These weren't completed documents, but someone had clearly been preparing them. Someone had placed them inside my safe, inside my own house. Rebecca examined the papers quietly. They've never been executed. No. But someone intended to. She nodded. I believe so. There was another sheet underneath. This one listed my investment accounts. Another listed property tax information. Another summarized the estimated value of my estate. Every page had been printed from information available only through my personal records. Rebecca looked directly at me. I think we should make one thing very clear tonight. What? When your son arrives. She closed the folder. Don't accuse him. I looked surprised. Why not? Because we already have enough facts. If he explains honestly, we'll know. If he lies, she let the sentence hang unfinished. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Michael stood outside alone. No Jennifer, no Karen, no children. He looked older than he had 2 weeks earlier. His shoulders sagged. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. He stepped inside cautiously. Then he noticed Rebecca sitting at the dining room table. His expression immediately changed. "You hired a lawyer," I answered calmly. "No." I remembered I already had one. He swallowed. Then his eyes landed on the open folder beside Rebecca. Specifically, on the blank power of attorney forms lying on top. Every bit of color disappeared from his face. He hadn't expected to see those documents, which meant only one thing. He already knew they existed, and before anyone spoke a single word. His silence answered the question I hadn't even asked yet. Michael stood frozen in the entryway. He hadn't spoken a single word since seeing the papers on my dining room table. For years, I had believed I could read my son's face better than anyone else. I knew when he was nervous before a job interview. I knew when he was hiding a poor report card. I knew when he had fallen in love with Jennifer long before he admitted it. Now, for the first time in my life, I saw something entirely different. Not fear of being caught. Fear that there was no longer anywhere left to hide. Rebecca remained seated. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask questions. She simply watched. Sometimes silence reveals more than interrogation ever could. I motioned toward the chair across from me. "Sit down, Michael." He obeyed without argument. The room remained quiet for another few moments. Finally, I picked up the envelope from the safe. "Have you seen these documents before?" He stared at them. "Yes." The answer came so quickly that even he seemed surprised by it. Rebecca made a small note on her legal pad. I looked at my son. "Thank you for telling the truth." He nodded weakly. "I promised myself I wouldn't lie anymore." I appreciated the effort. It didn't erase what had happened, but it mattered. I carefully removed the blank power of attorney forms from the envelope. "Why were these in my safe?" He rubbed both hands together. "I put them there." "When?" "A few weeks before the cruise." "Why?" He closed his eyes. "I wanted to talk to you. About taking control of my finances." "No." "About planning ahead." Rebecca spoke for the first time. "Planning ahead for what?" Michael looked toward her. "In case my mother became seriously ill." Rebecca remained calm. Had any physician diagnosed Mrs. Jenkins with a condition affecting her ability to make decisions? No. Had she been declared incompetent? No. Did she ask you to prepare these documents? No. Every answer sounded smaller than the one before. I asked quietly, "Then whose idea was this?" "My own." The words hung heavily in the room. He wasn't blaming Karen. He wasn't blaming Jennifer. He wasn't blaming anyone else. For the first time, he accepted responsibility. I appreciated that. But responsibility without explanation still leaves unanswered questions. "So explain it to me." He looked at me with tired eyes. "When Dad died," he stopped. "I watched you fall apart." "I did." "You forgot to eat." "Sometimes." "You stayed in bed." "For a while." "I honestly thought I was going to lose you too." My heart softened. Only a little. Because I remembered those months. They had been the darkest of my life. He continued. "Then you got stronger." "Yes." "But every time you got sick," his voice cracked. I imagined going through that again. I listened carefully. Not because it excused his actions, because understanding matters. I started reading articles about aging, about dementia, about families who waited too long. I remained silent. He looked toward the window. "Then your dizzy spell happened." "And I panicked," Rebecca asked gently. "So panic caused you to forge documents?" He immediately shook his head. "No." "What caused that?" Another long pause. Then he whispered, "Control." The honesty surprised everyone, including him. "I thought if I handled everything." He looked at me. "I could prevent anything bad from happening." I nodded slowly. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking what you wanted." "Yes." "You became a problem I was trying to solve." His eyes filled with tears. "I know." "No," I answered softly. "You became convinced I was no longer a person." "I never meant that." "I believe you." You stopped seeing your mother. You started seeing a responsibility, a risk, a future legal situation. He covered his face with both hands. I hate hearing it. I hated living it. Silence returned. This time, it wasn't hostile. It was honest. Rebecca quietly closed her notebook. May I ask one final question? Michael nodded. When you contacted the bank, he looked up sharply. You know about that? Yes. Why? I wanted to make sure everything was protected. Did your mother ask you to? No. Did you intend to steal her money? No. What did you intend? He answered immediately. I wanted to understand everything before an emergency happened. Rebecca studied him carefully. I believe you. Michael looked surprised. You do? I believe you never intended outright theft. He looked relieved. Then she added, but intentions don't erase actions. His shoulders dropped again. They never do. She organized the papers into neat stacks. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes. Based on everything I've reviewed, she looked directly at me. I do not believe your son attempted to steal your estate. I felt myself breathe again. However, she continued, I do believe he attempted to assume authority over decisions that legally and morally belonged only to you. Michael nodded slowly. That's fair. And had you continued down that path? She looked directly at him. You could eventually have crossed legal boundaries without realizing it. He whispered, I know. I stood and walked toward the living room window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Robert loved sunsets. I used to say they reminded him that endings and beginnings often happened at exactly the same time. I suddenly understood what he meant. I turned back toward my son. I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about forgiveness. He looked hopeful. I've decided something. What? I forgive you. He burst into tears. Thank you. I raised my hand gently. I'm not finished. He wiped his eyes. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I understand. No, I think you finally do. I walked back to the table. I'm changing every password. He nodded. I'm changing the safe combination. Another nod. I'm removing every spare house key. I expected that. I'm updating my legal documents. That's your right. I'm appointing Rebecca, not family, as the person who will make decisions if I ever truly become incapable. His face tightened for just a moment. Then, he nodded. I think that's wise. Rebecca looked genuinely impressed. That answer probably told us more than any apology could have. Karen arrived about 20 minutes later. Jennifer came with her. Neither woman expected to find Michael already there. The atmosphere felt awkward at first. Then something unusual happened. No one argued. No one defended themselves. Instead, each person accepted responsibility for exactly what they had done. Karen admitted believing her brother without verifying the facts. Jennifer admitted choosing convenience over conversation. Michael admitted confusing control with love. As we talked, Emma quietly walked into the dining room. She had come with Jennifer but remained outside until then. She looked around nervously. Is everyone okay? I smiled. We're getting there. She walked over and hugged me tightly. I'm glad you're home. So am I. Lucas soon joined us carrying a small framed photograph. It showed our entire family at Christmas 3 years earlier. Dad found this. He handed it to me. I thought maybe we shouldn't forget when we actually liked each other. Everyone laughed, even Michael. The laughter didn't erase what had happened. It simply reminded us that broken families aren't repaired through dramatic speeches. They're rebuilt through thousands of honest choices made afterward. As everyone prepared to leave, Michael stopped beside the front door. Mom. Yes. What do I do now? I thought about the question carefully. Then I answered, you stop trying to manage my life. And you start living your own. He nodded. I can do that. I hope so. Because for the first time in many years, I believed he finally understood that loving someone never gives you permission to take away their voice. 9 months have passed since the morning I watched my family board the cruise they believed I would never take. People often ask whether everything returned to normal. The answer is simple: no. And I'm grateful it didn't. Because normal was the life I had before. The life where I confused self-sacrifice with love. The life where I believed saying yes made me a better mother. The life where everyone else's comfort came before my own dignity. I have no desire to return to that version of myself. Instead, something quieter and much healthier took its place. The first major change happened only 2 weeks after I returned from Alaska. Rebecca finalized every legal update. My passwords were changed. My safe had a new combination. Every financial account now required direct confirmation from me before any modifications could be made. My estate plan was rewritten. Not because I wanted to punish my children, because I wanted every future decision to reflect my own voice. Rebecca smiled after we signed the final document. "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a moment. "Safe," she nodded. "That's exactly how estate planning is supposed to make people feel." The next surprise came from Dr. Harris. I scheduled an appointment not because I was sick, but because I needed answers. After examining me, he smiled. "You've returned from Alaska." "I have. I'm jealous. I saw whales. I told you that you would." Then I asked him the question that had stayed with me for months. "Did you ever tell my children I shouldn't travel?" His expression changed immediately. "No." "Did anyone from my family contact you after my appointment?" He checked my chart. "Your daughter called asking general questions about dehydration." And I told her exactly what I told you. "What was that? Drink more water. Avoid excessive heat. And enjoy your vacation." I laughed. "So you never advised canceling the trip?" "Absolutely not." Hearing those words brought me peace. Not because I doubted my memory anymore, because every lingering question finally had an answer. Life gradually settled into a new rhythm. Karen visited every Sunday, not because she felt guilty, because she genuinely wanted to rebuild our relationship. The first few visits felt awkward. We talked about gardening, books, church, weather, anything except the cruise. Then one afternoon she quietly said, "I spent my whole life assuming Michael always knew best." I looked at her. "So did I." She smiled sadly. "I don't anymore." Neither did I. Jennifer surprised me the most. One Saturday morning, she knocked on my front door carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I was wondering," she hesitated, "if you'd teach me how to bake Robert's peach pie." I laughed. "You never liked baking." "I still don't." "Then why?" She smiled. "Because Emma says yours tastes like family." We spent the afternoon covered in flour. The first pie burned, the second collapsed, the third finally looked respectable. We laughed harder than we had in years. Healing rarely announces itself. Sometimes it simply arrives disguised as pie dough. Michael took much longer. He never asked for forgiveness again. Instead, he quietly began earning trust. He stopped offering advice I hadn't requested. He never asked about my finances again. He returned every spare key he still possessed. One afternoon, he arrived carrying a small box. "I found these in my garage." Inside were every photocopy he had ever made of my documents: passport, insurance, driver's license, everything. "I should have destroyed them months ago." He placed the box on the table. "I wanted you to do it instead." Without saying a word, I carried the papers to my fireplace. One by one, I fed them into the flames. Michael watched silently. When the last page disappeared, he whispered, "I don't expect you to trust me again." I looked at him. Trust isn't a destination. It's a direction. What does that mean? It means every honest choice you make points you toward it. He nodded. I understand. I think you finally do. The greatest surprise came from Emma. On my 68th birthday, she handed me a wrapped package. Inside was a photo album. The first page contained pictures from my Alaska cruise: whales, glaciers, mountains, the little bookstore, sunrises from my balcony. Then halfway through the album, the photographs changed. Family dinners, church picnics, Christmas, my garden. The final page contained only one photograph. It showed me standing on the deck of the cruise ship, smiling into the wind. Beneath it, she had written one sentence. "Thank you for teaching me that growing older doesn't mean giving away your voice." I cried harder than I had in a long time. Not because of the photograph, because I realized someone had actually learned the lesson. Perhaps all the pain hadn't been meaningless after all. These days, people sometimes ask whether I'll ever take another cruise. I smile every time. I've already booked one. This time to Norway, next spring. When Michael heard about it, he laughed. "Need any help with the paperwork?" I smiled. "No." He laughed too. I figured. Then he surprised me. "If you need someone to water your roses while you're gone." He stopped. "I'll wait for you to ask." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. "Thank you." That was enough. Not because everything had been forgotten, because boundaries had finally replaced assumptions. And boundaries, I have learned, don't weaken love, they protect it. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I still sit on my back porch watching the sunset. Robert's fishing hat still hangs beside the back door. Only now there's something new beside it. The wooden sign I bought in Alaska. The best journeys don't change your location, they change your perspective. Every time I read those words, I smile. Because my greatest journey was never to Alaska. It wasn't across glaciers. It wasn't aboard a cruise ship. It was the journey back to myself. The woman who finally remembered that kindness should never require surrender. That love without respect becomes control. That forgiveness is possible without abandoning wisdom. And that no matter your age, you never need anyone else's permission to keep living your own life. Ketuk Fan 15, Life Lesson. If my story has taught me anything, it is that love and control can sometimes wear the same face. The people who love us may genuinely believe they know what's best for us, but love should never silence our voice or replace our choices. Growing older does not mean giving up our independence, our dreams, or our right to make decisions about our own lives. Trust is one of the greatest gifts we can give another person. But trust should walk hand in hand with healthy boundaries. Saying no does not make you selfish. Asking questions does not make you distrustful. Protecting what you've spent a lifetime building does not mean you love your family any less. In fact, clear boundaries often save relationships that would otherwise be damaged by resentment and misunderstanding. I also learned that forgiveness is not the same as pretending nothing happened. Forgiveness can open the door to healing, but rebuilding trust requires honesty, accountability, and consistent actions over time. Real reconciliation is earned one choice at a time. Most importantly, never postpone the life you've dreamed about. Too many of us spend years waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect health, or everyone else's approval. Life is uncertain, and our dreams deserve to be lived while we still have the chance. Whether your dream is traveling, learning something new, reconnecting with old friends, or simply choosing yourself for once, don't wait for permission. Your life belongs to you. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. What would you have done if you had seen your own family boarding the vacation you paid for? Could you forgive them? Please share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy heartfelt family stories like this one, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so we can continue these conversations together. Until next time, take good care of yourself and never stop believing that it's never too late to begin again. Every family has moments that test the strength of love, but true love is never built on control, fear, or silent decisions made on someone else's behalf. One of the hardest lessons we can learn is that growing older does not mean surrendering our independence. Our age may change our pace, but it should never take away our voice, our dignity, or our right to choose how we live the years we have left. Sometimes the people closest to us make mistakes, not because they hate us, but because they allow fear, pride, or the desire to control outcomes to replace honest conversation. Even when intentions begin with concern, they can become harmful if they ignore the simple question every person deserves to hear: what do you want? Respect is one of the greatest expressions of love, and without respect, even good intentions can leave deep emotional scars. This story also reminds us that forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness allows our hearts to heal, but wisdom teaches us to set healthy boundaries. You can forgive someone without handing them the keys to your future again. You can love your family while protecting your peace. The strongest relationships are not built on blind trust. They are built on honesty, accountability, and mutual respect. Most importantly, never postpone your dreams. Because you believe there will always be another year, too many people spend their lives waiting for the perfect moment, only to discover that time never makes promises. If there is a place you've always wanted to visit, a dream you've always wanted to chase, or a life you've always wanted to live, don't wait for someone else's permission. Your story is still being written, and every new chapter is a chance to choose yourself without guilt. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you had discovered your own family, boarding the vacation you worked so hard to pay for? Would you have forgiven them, or would you have walked away? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. If you enjoy heartfelt family stories with powerful life lessons, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next journey. Until then, take care of yourself, treasure your voice, and never stop believing that it's never too late to reclaim your own life.